Welcome to the Brevosity. I'm Brevon, and today I want to talk about a game that I think has a special place in the hearts and the childhoods of a lot of people. Fable, released in 2004 on the original Xbox and remastered with the Anniversary Edition for the 360. It was a fantasy RPG with some things that made it really unique for the time. I have my own history with Fable. It's one of the first RPGs I ever played on the original Xbox back when I was a kid. But I'm going to set that aside today because I want to take a real objective look at this game. With the Anniversary Edition, that's what I'm playing it on. Backwards compatible on an Xbox Series S. It runs pretty well. There's glitches, of course. It's an old game. It is a little overly glitchy, but overall, it's a decent technical experience for such an old game. So, talking about Fable. So one of the things that surrounds it that you might not know about, but was a big thing at the time of release was Peter Molyneux. Molyneux. So this guy was the head of Lion's Head Studio, and he was putting out some interesting things, to say the least, trying to advertise and promote this game. From the infamous acorn that could fall from a tree and grow into another tree, which was never a feature implemented in the game. Peter, we're just gonna call him Peter, hyped up this game a ton. Before release, and it was a Cyberpunk 2077 level disappointment when it came out due to these, compared to these expectations. But I don't have these expectations. I'm not looking at it from this perspective because it's been a decade, almost two. So the hype is gone, to say the least. Not that it's not an interesting experience, and obviously it's did something right if I'm here talking about it so many years later. So let's get into it. Let's start with the prologue, and of course, before the prologue, we have, just like many RPGs, there's a opening narration. And just like many RPGs, it gives us the information we need to know going into the setting, and is a bit on the nose with the fact that you can make choices and with what's going to happen later in the game. I've seen this in lots of other games. And you probably have too. But these lines are read wonderfully. There's some wonderful narration with really good voice acting, and we see some fantastic art that's supposed to look sort of like a storybook, or even has sort of feel of a stained glass window, that kind of art in there. Through this narration, you are told where we're going to be starting in the game. You are a young boy living in the small village of Oakvale. It's your average fantasy village. So in this village, you're introduced to your father and your sister. It's your sister's birthday, and you have to get 3 gold pieces to get her a present. Your father offers to give you the money for doing good deeds, and you can also make the money by doing bad deeds. This is where we're introduced to the game's morality system that will be present throughout the entire experience. Good and bad. Just like many games have done before, just like many games will probably do in the future. We've seen more of a push towards the neutral, morally gray options in the modern day, but these good, bad, good, evil systems, light side, dark side, Paragon, Renegade, these kind of systems were really prevalent in these early days of RPGs, early 2000s to the early 2010s. They were very prevalent through all these years. Fallout 3, Mass Effect, and the system works to a point. It's not a bad system. In the village, we see, you can, a guy asks you to guard these boxes for him, and you can either do your job or you can break the boxes and steal what's inside. So it's very simple things at the prologue here, but at the end of this prologue, after you've gotten the money through your good or bad means, or a mix of both, your village is attacked by bandits. Your player character hides in the worst spot I could possibly imagine, and it's been commented on many times. Everyone notices it. Your village is burned, is the point here, and your family is killed, at least you think so. Spoilers. After this, you are wandering through the burning wreckage of your village, and you're picked up by a blue-faced, bioluminescent man here, Maze. Maze is one of the top-ranking members of the Heroes Guild. an ancient order and one of the most important groups in this world. People are called heroes in this world regardless of moral alignment, whether you're good or evil. It just seems to be you have to train with the guild or master the ways of might, skill, and will in some sort of way. So Maze hauls us off to their hero training school because their numbers are running out and they're needing desperately of new heroes. So this is where the real game starts. We're still tutorialized at this point, but things are starting to pick up. So one thing you'll notice here is that the remastered graphics look pretty decent, but the overall art design is obviously going for this sort of fantasy parody look almost. It reminds me very much of the storybook feel, and everything is very caricaturized. We have large heads with very pronounced cartoonish features, and the large hands and feet. Yes, very caricaturized, and there is a style though to it. Obviously, it's a very memorable art design. It's a pleasant art design. It does have that feel of a storybook. There are bright colors, and it's aged very well for how old of a game it is. If the game would have had more realistic graphics, I don't think it would have aged as well. So we've been introduced to Maze, and now we're introduced to the Guildmaster. This bald, tiny mustached man is our short little Dumbledore type, but the difference is he's a fuckwit. He will be whispering in your ear for the rest of the game, and will do basically only that. What he's going to teach you is the basics of combat. With the X button, you have melee attacks. With the Y button, you have ranged attacks with a bow. And with the B button, you have access to different types of magic. The tutorial is really on rails, and it's a bit slow, but it takes you through everything you need to know. And another person we are also introduced to at the beginning is Whisper, and you will get tired of her very quickly. She's notoriously an annoying character, and the whole school thing is weird because your family was just murdered. Maze just sort of grabs you up. I mean, he does save you, but he just sort of whisks you off to the school, and they're like, all right, you train in the morning, like up and at 'em. And Whisper talks about how like hardcore this place is, how people don't last very long. And, like why are we being brought here after our family was just killed? Surely, or why are they putting us straight into training? I don't know. Maybe this world is just in such dire need of heroes. They have to do this, or maybe it has something to do with your player's bloodline, which we'll find out later is very important. Let's talk a little more about combat through the tutorial. So we have the melee combat. With all the combat, you lock on with one of the triggers, and then you use X, Y, or B to attack them. The lock on is a bit iffy. It's hard to direct sometimes, specifically who you want to lock on to. So you might end up locking onto the wrong person, which isn't that bad when there's all enemies around. But we'll get into how that works with some NPCs here in a bit. But continuing, we have the bow, which targeting with the bow using that same lock-on system. Again, a little fiddly, but it works well enough, especially for an action combat system in a game this early on the Xbox One's life cycle. I mean, this was one of the first games on consoles to be an RPG with action combat. Deus Ex did it on PC not too long before that, but this is the next move. This is moving to consoles and getting an action RPG style onto that. For being something that's pushing in its field, it's pushing and being prototyping things. It's pretty decent. Rudimentary, which we'll get into, but overall it's a system that works well enough, and yeah, the magic, the lightning feels pretty good. Same targeting system, but one thing with the bow, going back to that, is the free targeting system. Where you will zoom in, you'll get a reticle. I used it once in the tutorial and never used it again. It's not very useful. It takes too long, and the maps are much too small for it to be really that helpful. After you train, you will now be an adult, ready for your graduation, your final test. And this final test is to fight Maze, the blue-faced man who found you in the woods. It's a pretty basic fight. You're not really fighting him. You're just showing him as much as they build it up that you've got to fight Maze. You're not really fighting him. You're just hitting him, and it's very easy. It goes on. The tutorial itself goes on for a while, but it sets things up pretty well. It gets you a feel for this school, especially if you do some of the side stuff in there. You can just train a little extra or go do some things with Whisper. But it gives that Hogwarts sort of feel to a point. It's a bit basic. It's very quick, but I think it gives just enough time to feel the school vibe and feel that for just a little bit before we get into the gameplay. I think it would have been nice if maybe instead of doing the Oakvale beginning, they would just have started you in the school, because the whole tutorialization of everything goes on for a little bit too long, and you feel like, okay, come on, I know what I'm doing. Let me into the game. But again, this was all much more fresh and new 2004, so they thought, you need more guiding through this. But after you defeat Maze, you will be given your first quest. And it will be to go and kill some wasps in the woods. It's fairly simple stuff, but this introduces us to the map and quest cards. So to accept a lot of main quests and side quests, you will have to go back to the Heroes Guild and use the map in the map room. This is a fairly simple thing. It can be a little bit annoying, but you have a button at all times where you can teleport back and then teleport back to where you were, so it works well enough. It works even better on the Series S with the very fast load times. Even with the fast load times, it starts to get a bit cumbersome teleporting all over the place and having to teleport back every single time you want to start one of these quests. Looking at the map, we have quest cards. Each of these quest cards has a renown requirement. So renown is a system. It's fairly basic. Basically, the more quests you do, every quest, or just some things you do, will give you renown. And it's basically just a rank you have that will give you access to new quests. So we have to do the mission where we go kill wasps before we can so we can get more renown and get more access to new quests. Before we go, we are introduced to the skill system. So the skills are pretty interesting, although relatively basic when it comes to the melee, and they call it skill trees, but there's also the will tree, which is fairly expansive. So in the might tree, you have an upgrade where you can make your character stronger, where you can make him tougher per se, where you have a natural physical resistance, and then also increase his overall health. But these are the only 3 upgrades you get in that tree. They rank up to level 8. And in the skill tree, it's fairly similar. Skill being what the tree of skills is called. That's a little confusing, but I hope I explained that well, and you could see it here. So in this tree, you have skills that increase your range damage as well as your speed overall with all attacks. And the last skill you have of the 3 is Guile, which will increase your buying and selling prices as well as allow you to sneak better. And we'll get into some of the things that does later. But when moving on to spells, we see a plethora of these. We have everything from fireballs to, of course, the lightning you started with. There's slowing time, there's shooting multiple arrows, turning enemies on each other, summoning. There's a plethora of skills, and they all offer varying playstyles and experiences. It's not they're not too varied, but it's pretty decent, and some of them get really overpowered in the late game without too many feeling weak. There's an interesting thing with experience where you actually have to hold a button or walk up to these green orbs to collect them when creatures die. It's kind of weird, but I didn't mind it. It's an interesting thing to do, I guess. Although relatively a non-factor, it didn't really change much. But you have 4 types of experience for each type of skill tree. You have the green, which is just basic experience for you can use in all skill trees, and then each might, skill, and will, all 3 trees have their own respective experience that comes with it, being marked by red for might, yellow for skill, and blue for your will experience. So everyone will end up making a character that uses all 3 of these, might, skill, and will, but you can just choose which you will focus on more and what you will use within those trees. So after killing the wasps, we'll be heading to Bowerstone, our first city, to meet Maze. So in Bowerstone, we're introduced to a number of things. First of all, NPCs, which we've seen before, but this is getting more of a experience for how they work in towns. All the NPCs will react to your character, albeit a bit over the top, booing or laughing or cheering for your character as they go, based upon your moral alignment, which you have points for, or even your outfit or things like that can give you scary or attractiveness. Low attractiveness will cause people to laugh at you. Low scariness will as well, and high attractiveness and will cause people to like you more, and high scariness will cause people to flee in terror from you. I played an evil character this recent time. I've played it many times before as a good character, and I had scary clothes on constantly, and so every time I walked into towns, crowds would just disperse, screaming and running in terror, and it was always a joy to walk through towns. It got a bit annoying sometimes, but overall, it was enjoyable to see everyone run in fear from you. And same thing if you're a good character and everyone will come cheer. Talking more about the towns, one of the first things you'll be introduced to is the pub. Every town has a pub and you can get drunk and trade food and alcohol, as well as play these pub games. The pub games are a relatively fun distraction. There's actually a surprising number of different ones. Each city has a different pub game, anywhere from match the card to like table golf, I think they call it. And they're overall a pretty fun little distraction to have. But talking about trading, at the pub you can pick up a keg of beer, which is a trade good. And what you can do with these is take them to other cities and sell them for a profit depending on what the people in that city want. So you can go to a city, see what someone wants, head to a different place to pick that up for cheap, and then sell it to someone in a different town. And the prices change depending on your guile skill as well, which is what we talked about earlier. One of the skills in this is always confusing, but the skill tree, um, which also increases your sneak. And the only problem with this system, where it breaks the entire economy, is once you get max guile, you can easily buy a bunch of things from one person and then sell it back to them for a profit, making even more. And literally being able to, as there's no money cap on vendors, they have no limit to their money. You can just buy and sell and buy and sell and buy and sell the same thing and make literally infinite money. It's a shame that that's in there because it really does. I mean, it completely breaks the economy, and it couldn't have been really that hard to fix. Just even if they just cut off the last level of guile, I think that might fix it. But I'm not sure. You might be able to do it with the uh, level 7. But continuing through Bowerstone, you will come across the armor, the blacksmith as well, who's selling armor and weapons. And looking at the weapons and armor throughout the game, it's rather basic, but it works for the length of the game. There's only really, you have light weapons and heavy weapons, and that's the only real difference there, other than their amount of damage they do. And it's a relatively just straight shot of damage. Melee weapons are all going to act the same. Some are going to be a little bit, the larger, heavier ones are going to be a little bit slower than the lighter ones, but they all feel relatively the same. And there's a decent progression loop. There's a decent feeling of getting stronger without becoming too strong, as well as a decent number of unique weapons that you can find throughout the game, some really strong ones, with some really strange ways of getting to them that we'll get into as we talk about a little further into the game. Armor is the same thing, although unique. There's not very many, as armors also have a light and dark variant. With armor, you have, of course, your defense, but you also have a scariness or attractiveness rating like we talked about before. I was constantly ranking up my scariness and wanting to look dark and evil, and there is a clear reaction in the NPCs you see. You know, they running in absolute terror from you. And that's a cool system to see, especially on the original Xbox in 2004. All these NPCs also have their own routines where they'll go back in their homes and lock the doors at night and come out in the morning and go to work or wherever they want to go. And you can interact with them with a multitude of gestures you'll gain from reaching certain alignments or just certain points in the story or certain amounts of renown. There's a lot of goofy ones, a lot of really fun ones, from farting to belching to fist pumping, which looks a little strange, and posing. And this is your main way of interacting with the townspeople. Um, you can use these gestures and your attractiveness rating, and sometimes your overall alignment will help to find yourself a wife. And as we'll see as well in Bowerstone, you can buy homes. So every town has a home for sale, and with a good character, if you want to play a fully good character without doing a little bit of sort of exploiting we'll talk about here in a minute, if you want to play a fully good character throughout the whole game, we'll only be able to buy one building in each town, from what I've seen. There's one house for sale, and that's what you'll be able to buy. And you can move in there, you can rent it out for money, which again is a really cool system for a game this old, especially since we don't even see stuff like this in some new games that are attempting similar things. So if you're an evil character, though, you have many more options when it comes to land ownership, as anyone you kill who owns a building, that building will then become unowned after they are dead. And you can then buy that building, meaning, yes, you can kill everyone in a town, buy up all the buildings, and then rent them out. So that was a really fun thing to do on an evil character, and I really enjoyed it. And it didn't. Obviously, we already have the economy broken from Guile, but if you remove that, then I would say that this particular thing didn't actually break the economy. You had a lot of money, which meant you had access to more advanced equipment, but with the way rent comes in and the length of the game, it really didn't break things. So, continuing with the town, you have a barber, which can change your haircut, and that will the same thing: scariness, attractiveness, all that, alignment. Um, and of course, it'll just change the look of your character. Which again is a nice thing, a nice bit of customization in a game from this time. So, moving on, we talk to Maze in Bowerstone, and he tells us our sister's still alive, but then just basically fucks off. And we then have to gain enough renown to do more missions. So from here we have access to a few missions, two of which being different sides of the same mission. You can either be in the bandit group that's going to attack this farm, or you can defend the farm from these bandits. So this is a good little way of offering you that good and evil choice, and it's before you even start the quest. I really like that idea that you can have that choice going into the quest rather than choosing in the middle. And after that, you are going to have to do a mission with two traders where you're going to need to escort them through a very dangerous part of the forest. Speaking about the art design again, that's what we've seen mostly from here, is these relatively generic fantasy forests. Bowerstone is a pretty small town, but it's got a nice big wall. It's got a fantasy city sort of feel, and it really is all there's a very light-hearted look so far. And the Darkwood changes that a little bit, but it's a very over-the-top evil darkness. And in the Darkwood, we have to escort these traders through it, and it's relatively annoying trying to protect them with their shoddy AI and the shoddy tools we have at our disposal. Like I said, the action combat system is decent, but it's not decent enough to where when I'm trying to protect these guys and they get hit, I don't really feel like it's my fault. The best strategy I found was just to leave them at the beginning of the map and just go to the end and fight everything through the current map I was on, and then going back and grabbing them. So you go through the Darkwood with them, and it's a relatively annoying little thing, as good as the art design in the Darkwood is, it's this really well done dark fantasy forest, and while it's a bit generic, it's on purpose. It's all feels like it is. It's a parody of these storybooks, these fairy tales. This is a good place to talk about the structure of the world and how it feels. It's all made up of very small hallways, actually, um, and it's somewhat disguised well. There's a good art design. You feel like you're in bigger places, but it's clear that you're still walking in just small lines, and it's a large world overall made up of these small one hallway with a few different paths, levels, and overall I enjoyed the map design to a point. It got a bit annoying having all these loading screens. I'm sure it would even more on the original Xbox, going through each of these zones, these little levels. But overall, I think it worked, and it made the world feel large, and allowed you to go back to these areas and do more than just one thing in them. Near the end of this mission with the traders, you are introduced to the Chapel of Scorm. This chapel to the evil dark god Scorm is where you can sacrifice people for dark alignment points, as well as money and additional rewards, such as the best bow in the game. But the system is overall complicated. Different times of day can net you different rewards, and different people will net you different rewards as well. I'm not exactly all that sure how it works. I didn't interact with it all that much, as I was playing a fully evil character. So, strangely, I actually couldn't convince people to follow me to the shrine because I was so evil. Um, that they didn't want to follow me, they were afraid of me. So continuing on, we get to Oakvale, back to our childhood home, and we meet with Maze, who tells us about some bandits that may have something to do with people that attacked us as a child. So we go to this camp, and we're introduced to stealth through a pretty bad forced stealth section, and what a coincidence, the only forced stealth section in the entire game. Um, it's just really slow and contrived with fail states and how it restarts. So basically, they're gonna close the bandit camp. They're gonna close the gate if they see anybody coming up there, and they have little patrols out throughout the level. And so you have to sneak around all these patrols, and if any of them see you, they close the gate. But all you have to do is then kill all the bandits if you're spotted, and then hide for a few seconds. The gate will reopen, and they'll send more people out, and you'll have to try to sneak around them again, and that just works ad infinitum. So overall, it's a pretty simple system. Your guy he doesn't really crouch, but he goes into little sneak mode, and there's a little eye towards your map that will be open or closed depending on if people can see you, and have a little number of how many people can see you. It's a system that works well enough for what it's used for here, which is this 1-4 stealth section, and then the rest of the game it's just used to steal. And stealing, it works just fine. Talking about stealing, increasing your guile will increase whether people will see you during stealth. You could steal from stores, you could steal from people's homes, and at night everyone will go in and lock their doors, and depending on how much guile you have, you may be able to pick the locks rather than just bust the doors down. If you get caught doing any of these crimes, the guards will come after you, and you'll have to either pay a fine based on your crimes, or the guards will kill you or kick you out of the town. So, and some of these guards can get really tough when you get into the later cities, and they're just really coming at you. But it can be a good time to go at them. Continuing with the bandit camp, here we have a few good and evil choices we can make. You have to get these doors to be opened so you can get into where the bandit leader is, and you can't just go up and get them to open the doors, obviously. So you can either hire assassins to help cause a distraction, or you can help free these hostages which will then cause the guards to go get them. So another one of those good and evil choices. We see a decent amount of them throughout the game, as well as the main story. And after this, we're introduced to our first boss fight, Twinblade, the Bandit Chief. Um, so this is where we really see, how this basic combat system works. It's good for the time, and it works decently. But as we'll see with Twinblade and with all the rest of the bosses in the game, it's kind of annoying and a little too easy. Um, with lots of good ideas, but just with something wrong with the core of the combat. I think there's some iffy hitboxes on projectile attacks and just your character altogether. Uh, you can roll ad nauseum and just they're full of it's completely iframed, so you can just roll and roll and roll and roll and roll to keep avoiding damage. Um, and overall, the game never is too challenging, especially if you keep a steady supply of potions, which aren't too expensive. There's a decent enemy variety in the game. You have bandits, bugs. We have these short, fat little hobs, little fat goblins. There's skeletons, which in the later half of the game really start to be used in a strange way. They will just continuously spawn from the ground, and there's really no point in attacking them. You should just want to run past them, and that's when the game really starts to lose its steam with its combat. There's Balverines, which are basically werewolves. They're always terrified me as a kid, and they're cool. But one of the cool things to fight, they jump down, and then they will jump out of combat and disappear for a few seconds. And so there's a decent enemy variety, although they're relatively basic as a whole. There's also these mercenaries you can purchase in most towns. You have to pay them constantly, just like 100 gold, 100 gold, 100 gold every few minutes, and they're really not that useful. But it's an interesting system to have, just like many of these systems. The economy, even without overdoing Guile, can be pretty easy to play, and it can be easy to keep all the best equipment, which makes the combat relatively easy. But after defeating Twinblade, which again is a pretty easy fight, there's some really cool ideas with a circle of bandits that all hit you with their swords if you get too close to the edge of this circle. Well, it's a little arena where you're fighting him, but his attacks are extremely telegraphed. There's big windups and that you're gonna see coming, and you have lots of iframes, but the attack's hitboxes are still kind of annoying and not quite right, it seems. So after this fight, you're introduced to the bandit Cirrus, which turns out to be your sister, who's still alive, had her eyes cut out by these bandits, but she is alive, and she tells you that you're going to have to make a great choice, and then you're offered the good and evil choice, of course, of killing Twinblade or sparing him. Despite killing every single bandit on the way up here, apparently the good choice is to leave the leader alive, not the people he's convinced to follow him. So you can leave him alive if you want, or you can kill him. It's a pretty basic choice. And then after that, your sister just sort of disappears again. So this is a good time to talk about the overall writing and voice direction. The NPCs, the basic NPCs out in the world, are absolutely hilarious. Like there's so many just funny lines, and it's just the tone you get from all these the NPCs out in the world is like somewhere in between Shrek and Monty Python. It's just hilarious and with like a dry wit with a bit of goofiness to it, and I just really like it. But with the main story, there's just this sort of like B-movie vibe to the whole thing, where everything is just very to the point and delivered in a very strange way most of the time. The guild master, after the tutorial, he doesn't really become much of a character. He just sort of tells you when your health is low and your mana is low, which can get annoying, and when you have new quests. And Maze is just sort of your guide around the world. He's just telling you, okay, we need to go do this. Okay, you need to go do that. All right, let's. And he doesn't give much other than that. He's got an air of cockiness about him, and that he looks down to you a little bit. But they don't have much character. Whisper, the person your character grew up with in their home, she is just the worst. She's annoying and overly confident, cocky towards your character, and then her older brother, Thunder, who is this legendary hero of the arena, is just constantly talking crap to you as well, and so it just makes her it just makes me dislike her even more. And I don't know, I just really wasn't enjoying any of the main characters. Oh, there's also Briar Rose, who shows up for about 2 minutes, says something to you. I forgot about it. It's after you kill the wasps, I believe, and when you're heading to talk to May. She says something to you, and then she just disappears for the rest of the game until the very final mission. I forgot she existed, and then I seen her in the very final mission. I was like, oh, welcome back, Briar. She's just your cliche smart woman hero. But yeah, I don't enjoy any of these characters that are involved in the main story, and I don't know how the NPCs, the basic NPCs all throughout the world and through some of these side quests even. I'll talk about that real quick. The side quests, we have the pretty interesting ones. There's, of course, like I talked about, the wasps and the farm are sort of side quests, but you need to do them to get enough renown for the main quest. But more actual side quest style things, there's a book collection for this charity, for a school. There's a small child who's sick and needs these blue mushrooms that people are getting high off of, and there's a lot of fun lines with that, a lot of sort of Cheech and Chong type humor with these mushrooms and these psychedelic enjoyers. And then we have things like Beardy Baldy, which is a mission where a man tells you he has a daughter who he wants to marry off, but he tells you you need to have a specific haircut, and you go get the haircut, you come back, he tells you you need a specific mustache, and then a specific beard, and then at the end it turns out he doesn't have a daughter, he just likes making people like you look ridiculous. And there's just really fun premises to some of these side quests. There's a small boy you save from a cave of hobs and a pixie that has like taken him captured, and you take him back to his grandmother, and then he says, I'm packing my things, and says that the grandmother was worse than the pixies and the hobs and all that. And so there's just a charm and a really fun experience through most of these other side quests, whereas the main story is absolutely devoid of charm. It's like all the world itself and the NPCs and the side quests have sucked all the life out of the main story and the characters in it. But back to the main story. After we kill the bandit leader, we are again sent to do some sort of basic quests while waiting for our sister to pop back up again, I suppose. So this is an interesting place to talk about the fact that with my completely evil character who has been murdering villagers, raiding farms, and just being a complete asshole, farting on people, the guildmaster has absolutely nothing to say about this, and neither does Maze. It strikes me as sort of odd. You figure they would want to try to keep you from going to this evil, dark side. but neither one of them ever really brings up the fact that you're such an evil bastard, no matter how evil you become. I mean, you can get to the point where devil horns are coming out of your head once you reach level 100, and they're still not questioning the fact that you're this great hero. Uh, which I just found to be a bit strange, and we'll talk in a little bit about how it brings some really big problems up to us with the story. Combat at this point in the game is still just very basic, and your gear may start outpacing the enemies, and again, you're probably going to have enough money to buy lots of potions and to easily keep yourself alive. One thing to also talk about here is silver key chests. So throughout the world, you'll find silver keys in hidden areas, or if you're me, you'll find like 3 of them, even though there's like 100. Yeah, I was not very good at finding these silver keys. I don't know why. I really did try, and whatever was in these chests, I mean, it might be worth it. I can't really note on it, but I will say that I never felt like I was behind because I didn't find anything in these silver key chests. But other than that, I can't really note on those chests. I apologize, I really tried to find those damn silver keys. So we also have demon doors. So these are a really fun concept, and they're these giant sentient doors with big old heads that are going to come out when you walk up to it. And they want various things to open. Some of them want you to grow fat, some of them want you to commit great evil in front of them or dress like a knight, and some of them you may need to open for the main story. Maze asks you to find an archaeologist, which will require you to open one by figuring out its name and hitting them these corresponding stones with each having a letter. And there's a funny thing with that, the letters are S-H-I-T, and if it wants you to spell hits, but if you spell out shit, a large group of Balverines, which are basically werewolves, will come and try to kill you. So that's a fun little joke there. Again, the humor in this game, the lighthearted stuff, is absolutely fantastic, and it succeeds in putting a smile on my face every time. The first 2/3 of this game, the writing, out in the world when you're exploring and talking to these NPCs, and they're just yelling things at you. Another thing to bring up is the titles system, and so basically you can buy a title, whether it be edgy like mine, Deathbringer, the evil man, Deathbringer was the title. You start out with the title of Chicken Chaser. There's Assface, there's the Ranger, the Druid, there's more serious ones like that. And the really cool thing is that the NPCs out in the world, like, they will call you these things. They will yell out, "Hey, Assface!" In the beginning, there's some really funny lines about Chicken Chaser, Chicken Chaser. He don't look like no Chicken Chaser to me, but I ain't never seen one. There's just fantastic lines like this, and then when you're called Deathbringer, they'll yell out your edgy name. "Oh, it's Deathbringer!" And some titles, the Chicken Chaser is said the most of all the titles because it's one everyone will have. And different ones, have different levels of variety and how much people are gonna say them. But overall, it's a really fun system. And so after you do a few different quests, you might kill White Balverine, do some other things, you are going to be invited to fight in the arena. And this is a really fun little segment. And continuing to talk about combat and gear, going into the arena, one thing I failed to touch on is augmentations. So these are basically just mods you're going to be putting into your weapons, whether it be the bow or the sword. And there aren't any for armor, but you have them for weapons. You have health boosts, you have fire damage, lightning damage, just lots of different little things, penetration, and just lots of augmentations you could put on them. But going into the arena, this is a pretty cool, pretty fun segment. There's, again, the lightheartedness comes in when you're going in, There's lots of jokes with the arena leader, the guy putting putting the thing on, hosting it basically. Um, so the rules of the arena are: the more you fight, the without going to rest, going to buy more supplies, the more money you're going to win. And so each consecutive round, you make more and more money. In this arena, you're going to be fighting every enemy type in the game, from uh, beetles to bandits to skeletons to balverines. You're going to be fighting every enemy type in the game, and once you finish with all the basic enemy types, something I failed to mention, but you've had to fight a few times, are trolls. They're a mini boss sort of thing, and they also have pretty annoying attacks where if you get close, they will slam down with an obvious telegraph, but a strange hitbox. Um, and when you're far away, they will throw rocks that seem like their hitboxes are slightly bigger than they should be. Um, and so, but overall, they're not that difficult to fight. You just sort of keep your distance and try to dodge out of the ways of the rocks by moving back and forth. And I mainly focused on my bow this time. And so that's what I did. I hung back, used multi-arrow, which just absolutely melted them. So there's a lot of different ways with these spells you can handle the situation. And even though they have that large slam attack, you can still use melee, and you still have plenty of time to get some hits on them, jump back, let them do their slam, and then get some more hits on them, and then mix in some magic and stuff. It's not a bad system. It allows for you to mix and match all these different spells with your attacks. The spell system is really fun. There's some really good ones, like, of course, summoning things, and multi-arrow does lots of damage, and is a cool augmentation to your ranged kit from your spells, just like the Berserk, which makes your physical attacks do more damage. And talking about Berserk and Physical Shield, each of these is exclusive to the light and dark side. With the Physical Shield, you can only get to the higher levels of that by being light alignment, and you can only get to the higher levels of Berserk by being dark alignment. So that's cool. And there's just a lot of spells that work with your melee and ranged. So moving through the arena, at the end of the arena, you have a giant scorpion, which is a completely unique boss. You'll only fight here, and I really liked it. I was happy to see a new enemy, because throughout the arena, once I got to the rock trolls, which are the right before the giant scorpion, I was really getting tired of the arena, because it's all enemies I fought before, it's all enemies I knew I could beat, but it had just become tedious at that point. But then that giant scorpion came out, and it was like, okay, let's kill this thing. I've never seen this before, this is cool, and overall I did take it out pretty easily, though, with multi-arrow and my bow. So I failed to mention, but sometime around the second or third round, you're joined by Whisper, your kind of friend, rival sort of thing from the school. And she fights with you until the final round. You kill the scorpion, and she doesn't really help very much. And in the final round, a man named Jack of Blades, a old legendary hero supposedly, who left the guild and disappeared, who is only now returning, comes out and tells you that you need to fight Whisper to the death. So you fight her, and then at the end you're offered the choice of whether you want to kill her or let her live. On my current playthrough, it absolutely felt fantastic to just take her out, because she had been extremely annoying up to that point. Saving her isn't really that satisfying because she is so annoying, and I suppose you could say it makes you feel altruistic, but I don't find it that satisfying. And that goes for the most of the game. The good side feels not that satisfying because all of the heroes we're helping are a bunch of fucking dunces. I mean, it just doesn't feel good to help the Heroes Guild save the world, because you're doing all the work, and they're just, yeah, being fucking dunces. Like, the guild master's just standing around the guild, Maze is just teleporting around asking you to do things, Whisper and Thunder are just constantly talking crap to you, even though you're clearly better than them. And that's the big problem, is with the main story, is I don't like our heroes one bit. Even your sister, her voice is grating, and while I like some of her story, the fact that she was kidnapped by these bandits, her eyes were cut out, and then she basically became one of the top dogs in a different bandit clan, the Twin Blades bandit clan. Um, it's not bad, but her as a character, she's just prophetic, but in not a necessarily great way. Maybe I just don't really like these prophetic, spiritual type characters, but I really didn't care for her character as a whole. So, in the arena, like I said, Jack of Blades, he is introduced. Jack is the main villain for the game, and he's introduced. We're at about halfway, or a little more at this point, and he's finally been introduced. He is behind the murders of your family and everyone in your town, you will come to find out. And according to your sister, he wants to obtain a sword that will give him the power to destroy the world or something evil. Like my extremely evil character cares, and like she should be telling me this, because I'm just going to take the sword right from him. This sword happens to be locked away in a place that can only be accessed by someone of your bloodline. And so that's why he's searching for you, your sister, or your mother, and why he burned down your village looking for you in the past. Before continuing with the main quest, though, after you finish the arena, you were offered the best side quest in the entire game. The most fleshed out, and just one of the most interesting. So, it involves Lady Grey, the Mayor of Bowerstone. There's a good and evil version of this quest, with the good having you talk to a man she's wrongfully imprisoned for saying she killed her sister, which, as you'll find out, she definitely did, and the evil side having you do all kinds of things for her to try and marry her, finding out that more and more how evil she really is. The final thing she wants from you to marry you, and what the imprisoned man wants as evidence that she killed her sister, is her sister's necklace. You will obtain this from the Grey House, her childhood home. Once you obtain the necklace, you can either give it to her or reveal the fact that she's a murderer to the people of Bowerstone, having her imprisoned. The evil side of the quest, marrying her, also gives you access to another quest which has you fighting Thunder for the right to marry her. The Thunder fight is fine, but again, it's relatively annoying with over-telegraphed moves that have strange hitboxes that are hard to avoid. And sadly, at the end of this fight, you aren't offered the ability to kill Thunder as an evil character. He just sort of limps away. So at the Grey House as well, you will talk to your sister. She will tell you that Jack has your mother imprisoned and a way to get there through the Witchfield Graveyard. The Witchfield Graveyard is a pretty fun little section. There's a demon door that needs open to give you access to the secret entrance to the prison. The demon door wants you to find all the pieces of armor of an ancient hero named Nostro that two buffoons have hidden all over the graveyard. This is a pretty fun section. It has those skeletons I was talking about earlier that constantly spawn through the graveyard, but it works as sort of an obstacle while you're running around trying to search for each item. You might have to dig with the spade or fish, which is systems I haven't talked about before. So with the spade, you can you can then dig in literally any place in the entire game world. It offers an interesting amount of things to find and places to dig in, although it's relatively underutilized when it comes to quests. Another thing is fishing, which allows you to get fish and items such as one of Nostro's armor pieces, and it's a pretty fun little minigame and offers lots of fishing holes to fish at. They're both fun little distractions, and in this quest, they offer some interesting new things to the quest design. Once you find all of Nostro's items, you will then enter through the demon door in the secret entrance of the prison. This is where the game starts to go downhill. The path towards the prison is full of respawning hordes of skeletons like we saw in Witchfield, except there's no incentive to have to deal with them like finding Nostro's armor parts. So all you end up doing is running past these hordes of skeletons, trying to avoid them unless the red doors pop up that keep you from continuing, unless you kill all the enemies. Once into the prison, you will have a bunch of red-wearing advanced prison guards, and they just really start to crank the numbers up on this. You have hordes of these prison guards, and it really incentivizes you to just run past most enemies since you have no reason not to. And again, it's not that this is where the combat, although it doesn't pick up in difficulty, really starts to hit its annoying cap. Throughout the prison, you also fight some of Jack of Blade's minions. These really cool golem-esque, sort of Egyptian-looking creatures that make these very strange mechanical sounds. We've encountered them before, but I failed to mention. Their aesthetic design is interesting and unique, but when you're actually fighting them, they're not that much different than everything else. There are magic ones that'll shoot you, and there's melee ones that will attack you. But they're again really not that difficult to handle, and the magic ones can be annoying if there's a lot of them. And the melee ones can get overly blocky, which can make attacking them with melee combat be a bit annoying. So in the prison, you'll find your mother, and you'll start to break out with her. But about halfway through, you will run into Jack of Blades. He just shows up and takes you prisoner with a few of his minions. It seems just strange, because you're one of the strongest heroes who has ever lived at this point, and the game doesn't even give you a chance to fight him. Even if it was a fake fight that he would always win, I feel it would help this part sink in. The whole prison sequence after this is just feels strange and contrived and not even original. It's just the low point of the game as a whole right here. So again, you're one of the most powerful heroes, the arena champion, and you know, you probably own property all throughout Albion, but he just imprisons you. And it's also unclear, you know, how much control, politically I suppose, that Jack of Blades has. And who's in control. Because this is Blackgate Prison, this is just the prison of Bowerstone, the main city. And, you know, you might be even married to the mayor of Bowerstone, so why does Jack have the power to put you in the Blackgate Prison? Why does he have this control over the Blackgate Prison? It would be better if it was just a full prison of Jack's construction and his minions, I feel. But after a year, you finally escape the prison. Although it's a bit strange when you escape, as you haven't changed at all, you haven't become stronger, but Jack doesn't show up and just shove you back in a prison cell. He lets you escape this time, for some reason. When you get back to the guild, it's sort of strange that the guild master and nobody even comments on the fact that you've been gone for a year. They just act like everything's fine. The guild master just tells you you've got another quest card, and stands in the same spot he has been all game, being absolutely useless. So you then get sent to the Hook Coast to stop Jack's plans. It's a nice icy village, and I really like the art design of it. And in the Hook Coast, you're introduced to one of the worst enemies in the game, the Screamers. They aren't difficult to handle, they just drain your life. It's that they're extremely annoying because of their namesake. They just scream. Also, in the Hook Coast, you are going to find Maze on your way to stop Jack. Maze, it turns out, is evil. He is a coward and doesn't want to fight Jack. I really don't know how to feel about this. Maze hasn't really had a character previously, so it's not out of character, but then again, there hasn't really been anything hints dropped that he would betray you. So, I really don't know how to feel about this. I mean, how much do I care when a plank of wood tells me it's mahogany and not oak? I don't. So, his fight, again, it's very basic attack patterns and very telegraphed with strange hitboxes that make it sort of annoying to dodge. And it's really not that difficult. There's an annoying thing where he uses the guard spell, and you can't hit him for a while. And there's some weird. And as you can probably tell, the combat was just really starting to grate on me at this point. It was just rather insignificant, and I just really wasn't enjoying the combat design at this point. The bosses, as well as some of the in-game enemies, just really weren't interesting me. And I was still enjoying the city aspects, the interacting with the NPCs, some of the side quests, the pub games, the opening demon doors. I was still enjoying all this stuff, but there was a lot less of it at this point than there was towards the beginning of the game, towards the first half. It makes me feel like this last third was pretty rushed in development, because I feel like they would have more to do other than just the main story. So after Maze's betrayal, we get to the final stretch of the game. At this point, we just sort of chase Jack around the world while he's trying to open this summoning thing. Briar Rose shows up again and helps us, since we haven't seen her since the beginning of the game. It's a bit strange. Thunder shows up for 2 seconds and makes himself look completely useless by helping for a room and disappearing. And then basically we just continue failing to catch up with Jack and end up back at the guild. So at this point, Jack's just basically ripped through the guild, and apparently the sword is there, and he's gonna get it. He's got our mother, he's gonna kill her, use her blood to get this great sword. And the guild master tells you he's sitting against like a bookcase or something. He's like hurt, he's like, go stop Jack, And on a good character, it's underwhelming at best. It's like a little rote, a little trite, but in overall, it's not a bad fantasy adventure. It's a good fantasy adventure with bad characters. As a good character, and with an evil character, it's nonsensical. It's a nonsensical fantasy parody, because walking up to this, walking up to the guildmaster with devil horns, you've murdered, half the land and bought up all the buildings that they lost when they died, and he's telling you, go stop Jack, save the guild. Like, you're not just gonna take the sword and cause more issues. Like, I have devil horns. And that's, I know we're here at the end of the game, but something I forgot to talk about is some of the interesting body changes to your character as a whole. With alignment, you can get a halo for being good, or devil horns, like I just talked about, for being evil. The more you eat, you will get fat or skinny. Raising your might stats will give you more muscle. And some things, and that's about it. But it's like many of the systems, the life sim style systems, they're simple but good enough to be interesting and fun to play around with. But from here, the guildmaster tells you to stop Jack, and that's exactly what you do. You go in, Jack kills your mother, takes the sword, and you will fight him. And just like many of the other fights, he's going to turn giant, hover in the middle of the room, and shoot projectiles at you. And these projectiles are slow moving, highly telegraphed, but with a bit too big hitboxes. And again, the fight's not very hard. I used multi-arrow maxed out and just shot him a few times and he's done. That's another thing, is towards this last half of the game, last third, I would say, actually, the last third, you can be really, really overpowered. Like, if you have some of the highest end weapons in the game, some of the, if you have maxed out might skills or skills, or spells, like multi-arrow maxed out will one-shot all kinds of things, especially bosses. Um, Most of the spells, Berserk maxed out is good. There's a lot of spells maxed out that are really good. With your might maxed out and with some of these really good weapons, you're going to be really kicking ass with those. And you can just be extremely overpowered toward this final half of the game. Um, and it really makes the Jack fight underwhelming, um, but still, satisfying. Um, Jack overall, as an enemy, as your main antagonist, he's okay. He's cliched, um, basically a view of what your character could turn into. He's a hero that is turned extremely evil, and he's got some powers. You know, he's the evil guy that wants unlimited power. The old Papa Palps. Um, and from here, you're offered once again the final good and evil choice, and that is to take the sword, which will require you to kill your sister to take it, or destroy the sword. And as a final choice, it's pretty good. I like it. It it, it cements the good and evil that has been choices, the morality that has been present through the whole game, and wraps it up relatively cleanly. Um, Through most of the game, this morality, the good versus evil, is present. There are a decent amount of side quests where you don't have an evil choice. I've noticed, and there's also things like in this mission with a ghost where he wanted me to dig up his treasure and give it to his wife that was still living, and instead I just wanted to keep the money and make that my evil decision. Well, it allowed me to do that, but my quest was still was never completed. It just stayed there. And there are a number of quests that don't have evil options, and I think overall the story feels weird if you're evil, especially with the way the guild doesn't react to it as well. But I believe the game is much more fun as an evil character because it is so good in its goofiness, and it's just pure fun factor when you're fucking with all this stuff, with all these systems and just the people in the world. Um, Whereas if you're trying to play this as a good character and as like a really serious, you're trying to get into the story, you're trying to play this as a serious, hero's journey archetype adventure, it's gonna fall flat. It's not gonna satisfy, at least for me personally. The story is okay. It's basic, partly by design because it's a parody to a point, uh, but I don't think it's enough of a parody in its main story. It just ends up feeling rote and basic in its main story, and its main characters are just flat and unlikable. But everything outside of that is absolutely wonderful, and not everything in the main story is bad. When the main story is comedic, when the game is comedic as a whole, it's fantastic, and all of its life sim stuff, its sandbox elements, those are as easily broken as they are. They're it's sort of duct taped together, but it's still very interesting. And for a game that came out in 2004, it's almost revolutionary. Um, One that came out on consoles, that is. So, moving on, we have the Lost Chapters DLC. So, like I said, I wasn't very satisfied with the last third of the base game and with the main story of the game in general as a whole. Well, the Lost Chapters really changed that. I really enjoyed what this did, and I thought it was a really fun experience and a fantastic ending, conclusion to this whole thing. So, the Lost Chapters involves you going to a island off the Hook Coast, way up north in the freezing area, due to an ancient hero who is somehow still alive, even though he's all like zombie mummified looking. Um, Contacts the guildmaster and tells you that basically says that Jack is trying to revive himself. Jack is trying to return in some other form, so it seems he's some sort of entity rather than just a person. He's not human. Um, and you're given, no matter if you beat the game good or evil, you're given the Sword of Aeons. It's called something else if you are a good character, and it's supposedly cleansed of its evil and all that by Briar Rose. And you're given this weapon, and you're sent to this new area, a snowy area island to the north. Briar Rose will end up there with you, and she actually plays a much more prominent role in this DLC than her non-existence in the main game. So one of the first things you'll notice heading to this new island are the new enemy types. While they suffer the same issues as the combat and the enemy types in the rest of the game, they are probably some of the best enemy types in the game, and they're pretty fun to play against as a whole. It feels much more like the first 2/3 of the game. These enemies and the combat feels much more like the first 2/3 of the game, with the decent combat such as the arena and just fighting the smaller enemies rather than the infinitely respawning skeletons, the ridiculous amounts of guards, or the large bosses that don't do much and get killed pretty easily. Not that this is completely devoid of that, as we'll talk about. But heading into this new area, yes, we get to fight some new enemies, we get to get some new stuff. There's a demon door here, and eventually you'll find your way to the new city. It's just like all the other cities. It's got a new pub game, it's got some stores, plenty of buildings to buy, and of course you can get married there. You can do everything you can do in the cities in Fable. It's a good time. But this is also where you'll find the stone heads and the mummy man. The zombie Scythe, I think that might be him. I forget his name. But he tells you that you will need to collect these glyphs from the necropolis. And so to do this, you're going to need to dig at different graves. And so I did this whole thing. I just dug every single grave, wasn't paying attention, reading the graves, just dug at every single grave, and kept having to fight these enemies because some graves you pull out death glyphs instead of the ones you're looking for, and that makes enemies spawn. And then I finally got them all, or got these 3 of them, and as I was getting the last one, I got killed because I just wasn't paying attention to my health and my potions. I think it was pretty late at night, and I was getting tired. But I had reloaded all the way back at the beginning of this, and I was very upset. I was like, oh my gosh, now I'm gonna have to dig at all these graves. And that was until I started reading the graves, and I realized that negative things said on the graves were going to have death signs, and I really liked that little dynamic of, don't dig up the graves with negative things on them. And it's simple overall, but it's a fun little puzzle that uses the digging system, and I'm glad to see more things that use that, because it was an excellent idea and a well done thing in this game. So after you find all these glyphs, you can then speak to the stone heads. They tell you that Jack's rising and that you need to use his mask, fill it with these souls to defeat him, summon him, and then defeat him. So after they tell you this, you can then go and use an expression of each of the glyphs to ask the heads for lore information. And there's some cool stuff in here. There's some interesting stuff. It's all very generic fantasy stuff, and it's stuff you might already know about the world. But it's always cool to have some deeper lore be revealed to you, whether it's through books or means like this. So Briar Rose is then going to help you translate these stone things you need to reveal what 3 souls you need to fill Jack's mask with. So the first soul you have is the soul of the arena champion, or the king of the arena, I think they say. And you have 2 options. You can go to the arena and look for a spirit of an ancient or older arena champion to take, and you'll have to fight some skeletons and some other enemies. Or, my decision, you can go and kill Thunder. It was so satisfying to finally kill Thunder. He has the same exact attacks that he did in his previous fights, and the fight's basically the same. You can just wipe the floor with him, and it's extremely satisfying because how much of a cocky jerk he is, and I just loved it. So the second soul you need is the soul of the Heroine, I think it's called, as in female hero, just to be clear. And so you have 2 options. You can go to the Witchfield Graveyard and find your mother's soul, which she offers to give to you. Kind of fucked up, but technically the good side. I guess she offered. And your other option is to kill Briar Rose right there in front of it. You can guess what I did on my evil playthrough. You can kill her. It's not really that satisfying, as although she's a bit of a sarcastic jerk, she isn't in the game enough to really grate on you, and she actually is probably one of the better characters in the game. But she's a decent fight with the same issues that the rest of the game's fights have. But she has a fun mechanic, actually, where she will summon doppelgangers of herself, and you have to figure out which one is her, and that's fun. I always like fights like that. And I forgot to mention, during these decisions, who Jack, through his mask, is coaxing you to make all these evil decisions, and I mean, I didn't need the coaxing because I was already a super evil character at this point, but it was pretty interesting and cool to have Jack trying to coax you into this. And I'm sure if I was a good character, if I'd played a good character through the base game, I might be coaxed into making some evil decisions by Jack here, just because of how happy he seems to make these evil decisions. The last soul is the Ancient Soul, I believe it's called, or Soul of a Great Hero. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but your 2 choices are Nostro, the ancient hero in the Witchfield Graveyard whose armor you found. He offers to give you his soul, but you must take it in combat. He's a pretty fun fight, just a more advanced skeleton kind of fight. And the other option, the best option, one of my favorite things in the game, is the Guildmaster. Kill the Guildmaster to take his soul. Now, after this man had proven himself useless through the entire game, letting your character become this evil force, just wrecking everything and not realizing it at all, I was so happy to kill him. And to compound the fact that he did this, in the Lost Chapters, you could find a book or note or something that talks about how the Guildmaster revolted against the previous leaders of the Heroes Guild because he wanted to allow people to take morally questionable contracts. I find it hilarious. He basically turned these guys from actual heroes into glorified mercenaries who are willing to take contracts from bandits to attack towns. And it seems like even the developers know how much of a putz he was, because of the way they sort of make fun of him in this fight. So he runs off in the woods and has an army of guards protecting him. Um, and so if you want to kill him, you're going to head off into the woods and start fighting these guards, and he will launch this healing spell into the air and keep trying to heal them, and you just have to keep taking out the guards while they get healed, and eventually, you'll carve them up. It's actually a pretty fun fight because of the way it works, but again, same problems persist through the combat. So after slaughtering all these guards that he keeps trying to heal, you will meet him, and he's basically, he just basically talks a bunch of crap. He just says that you're evil, and you're just sitting there like, he says Jack's corrupted your mind and stuff, and it's like, listen, man, I've had devil horns since not whole glade, like I've had devil horns since before the arena. Okay, I'm fucking evil. You should have figured this out. And then you immediately can just kill him. Like, there's no fight. It's a bit disappointing, but I kind of liked it because of how much I didn't like him and how much of a putz I thought he was. You just immediately take him out with one hit. And Jack throws out a little joke, which is, it's good fun. And I really enjoyed it. Through this whole DLC, there's a much lighter tone in the main story. There's a much lighter tone, and it's really good. I really enjoyed the story in this DLC. And finally, with the last soul returned, you will open this large gate and be able to fight Jack. And it's kind of funny when you do return if you have killed the guild master and all those people, because Scythe, the zombie mummy guy, he's basically just like that was unnecessary, but he really doesn't seem that concerned. And it's just weird, the little amount of concern that these people have for people committing extremely heinous evil acts is strange throughout. The only people that seem to really react in a way that makes sense are the miscellaneous NPCs out in towns that just scream at you and run from you, and that's sort of backwards compared to most RPGs where the main characters would react rather than the miscellaneous characters. But the final fight with Jack, he's a giant dragon. He somehow possessed this body, and it's a fun fight. Same issues, it's relatively easy. I think I took him out in just a few shots with multi-arrow. Um, but while the combat isn't great, and it really started to bore me after, again, that 2/3 mark. Um, it's important to know that, like I said, this is one of the first systems, action combat systems, and we've seen so many from this point on, from after Fable, that it we're we have much higher standards now. And for the time, this was a very decent system, and it still offers a decent amount of choice in its spells and the way they're combined with the might and the skill trees. It's far from bad. It just, as it gets worse, it doesn't get worse. It just gets more boring as the games go along. But overall, I did enjoy the combat for all its problems. And I think that can be said for the game as a whole. It's an early 2004 Xbox game, original Xbox, that did a lot we hadn't seen before. It made a large world out of these small linear areas, and it gave us an action combat system and life sim elements, as well as good and evil choices throughout the story. This was all things that we hadn't seen in a console RPG before this. At least all these things put together, we hadn't seen in a console RPG before this. And I think the goofy tone that the NPCs have and the world really sets it apart and really is just really charming. And the Monty Python Shrek-esque comedy and setting, the fantasy parody is pretty good, and it's just overall, with the Lost Chapters DLC, I think it's a satisfying story. Even with the good, even playing on a good character, it's a pretty fun ride and a pretty decent story, albeit a bit mediocre. But playing an evil character all the way through the Lost Chapters, it's a great time. It is just excellent fun, like murdering people through towns and then buying all their houses. I mean, farting on people, belching on people, marrying people, sacrificing. It's a great time, and I think that's why Fable will be remembered. I'm surprised actually how many people remember this game. It's it really did something special, and it touched a lot of people's lives back when it came out. Especially a lot of people who were young and were kids at the time, had an absolutely great time with it. And I think, although its sequels didn't really do this, I think it really set a great groundwork to build off of in its sequels. And while they failed at that, I think that's a reason why I'm looking forward to Fable 4, and why everyone has always looked at this series and been like, that they can do something. Everybody's always saw that something can be done with this series, that with a little bit of tweaking, with a little bit of growth, it truly can be something great. And there's just nothing like Fable. There's nothing quite like it. And for all its issues, for its story problems, for its combat issues, for its easily broken sandbox systems, I wouldn't change anything about it. Not the first game. And it's a great experience to have, and it's something I'll always have memories with. The jank makes it special. The jank is a part of it. It's like a bad B movie almost. There's big issues, but it's memorable, and I really enjoyed it. I had a great time going back and experiencing it. I'm probably gonna do Fable 2 and Fable 3 reviews here in the next few months, so keep an eye out for those. Let me know what you thought of the review. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the Brevosity if you want to see more stuff like this. And comment down below with your thoughts on Fable. I also just wanted to say I'm sorry if this is like, if I'm shitting on your childhood. Again, I know this game touched a lot of people, and I understand why a lot of people love it, and I really do enjoy it a lot, but I had to be objective. I had to try to really look at the problems that this game has, and deconstruct it. So I hope you understand that, and that I really do enjoy the game, and I'll see you guys in the next one.